Now, 2 more budgets will be handed down today in the ACT and one in Queensland.
To find out what's planned for the Sunshine State, we're joined by Queensland Treasurer Tim Nicholls. Tim Nicholls, good morning and thank you for making time.
Good morning to you.
Now, given the large cuts to state funding by the Commonwealth in their recent budget, can you actually keep your hospital and education funding at current levels in this budget?
Well, this Queensland budget is a strong plan for a brighter future. Excuse me. And we will be not increasing taxes and we will be maintaining services. So we'll be able to continue to fund the tremendous work that's being done in our hospitals and also our education system, as well as providing more police in accordance with our election commitment. So we're able to do all of that without any new taxes.
OK, so I'm just going to repeat that question just to get a clear answer to that specific issue. Can you keep your hospital and education funding at current levels with the cut that's been proposed by the Commonwealth?
We will be able to continue to fund the great work that's going on in our hospitals and also in our education system.
At the current levels?
Absolutely, at the current levels.
Now, Queensland's deficit has quadrupled to $2.27 billion from 6 months ago. How can you guarantee that you still have a return to surplus in 2015-16? And if so, how exactly can you do that with that quadrupling in the way that it has?
Well, what we're saying is that Queensland, the hard work has been done here in Queensland, and we are on a path back to a surplus by 2015-16. That's a fiscal surplus for the first time in a decade. And barring any catastrophes or unavoidable events like a cyclone, we should achieve that.
You're owed some money, aren't you, by the Commonwealth, reimbursement for cleaning up after cyclones and natural disasters in Queensland. Is that right?
Yes, we are. $725 million was never paid to the Queensland government by the former Labor government, and we're still in negotiations. We've made some considerable progress with the federal government in terms of collecting that money, but there's still a little way to go before we collect all of those funds that weren't paid by Mr Swan some 3 years ago now.
And when do you imagine you'll actually get them?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
When do you imagine that money will actually be paid?
Oh, well, that'll be the outcome of negotiations, but I anticipate we'll receive that money over the next 12 months.
Now, you're expected to announce up to $32 billion in asset sales in this budget. So what guarantees can you give that the prices of utilities or services won't rise as a result?
Well, what we've seen is that while those businesses have been in government hands, prices have increased quite enormously over the last half dozen years or so. So quite clearly public ownership hasn't been the answer to increasing prices. The things that have increased prices in Queensland have been things such as the solar bonus scheme, which sees people being paid ridiculous amounts of money to put solar panels on their roof and has added over $3 billion to the cost of power bills over the next 20-odd years or so, and the carbon tax. And quite simply, the removal of the carbon tax would save over $140 from the average household bill right now if that legislation could get through the Parliament. We've made that point a number of times. The biggest contributor to the most recent increase in the power bills has been the carbon tax.
So is that a guarantee then that with privatisation the cost of those utilities will not rise for consumers?
Well, what we see, should the government go down the path of either selling or leasing assets or getting private sector equity, will be the disciplines of the private sector brought into the running of those businesses. But what we know is that government ownership has not led to any lesser of an increase in power prices. And what has occurred is that the power prices have gone up as a result of things such as solar bonus schemes and the carbon tax. They are the major drivers of increases in power bills, together with the network charges, and the networks are actually owned by the government here in Queensland, and we've seen those very large increases.
Yes,
so government ownership hasn't led to any lower prices.
Well, and we'll be talking about that in a moment as well, because that's speculated. There'll be some reveals there in the budget too. But the political reality of what you've got to try and sell this message into is a 13.6% spike in electricity prices in Queensland that's been indicated for July. Doesn't that make the job of selling privatisation even harder for you?
Well, I think the issue that we really need to focus on is the reduction in the $80 billion worth of Labor debt that was left to this government and the people of Queensland. And at nearly $15,000 for every man, woman and child, it's double the amount, for example, in Victoria or New South Wales, almost double the average of the rest of the Australian states. While we have that $80 billion worth of debt, we can't invest in the new schools, the new hospitals, the roads and the infrastructure that a growing state's going to need. So that's the challenge here in Queensland. We've had to stabilise the situation, which we've done in a very planned and methodical way over the last 2.5 years, and now we have to reduce that $80 billion worth of debt. There are a limited number of options: massively increase taxes, cut services, or consider the sale or lease of those assets. That's what we've been talking to Queenslanders about, and we'll be announcing our decision this afternoon in relation to the strongest choice to make and the smartest choice to make to pay down that $80 billion worth of debt.
But of course you'll be aware that asset sales were politically disastrous for the previous government. So how do you imagine you can sell this more successfully?
Well, the previous government was quite deceitful in the way they went about a lot of their business. Prior to being re-elected in 2009, they said they had no plans to sell assets. They said they would hang on to Queensland's fuel subsidy. Both of those promises were ditched almost immediately after they were elected. So there was a real lack of trust because of the deceit of the former Labor government here in Queensland. On the contrary, under the LNP government, we've been very upfront with people. We remain committed to saying and to delivering on our commitment, that is, that there will be no sale or lease without seeking a mandate from the people first. I've spent 2 months now, travelled 20,000 kilometres. We've engaged with over 70,000 Queenslanders as we deal with the $80 billion worth of debt we've been left by the Labor Party. The reality is there are no easy choices, and the choice that the government makes will be unpopular in some quarters. But Queenslanders will know that there is a government that has a plan to invest in the future and the funds to be able to carry out its plans and invest in the roads, the schools, the hospitals and the infrastructure that a growing state needs.
Tim Nicholls, the federal government cancelled the $50 million paid to the states to help supply pensioner concessions for water, transport and electricity. Will the states step in here in this budget, in your budget, or will pensioners be wearing these cuts?
Well, the state, in fact, will be increasing its contribution to the concession scheme, and I detail in a concession statement the $5.1 billion that the state does put into concessions. But unfortunately, because of the federal government cuts, which amount to over $200 million over 4 years, we are unable to absorb all of those changes, and so there will be a slight reduction in the subsidy. But the state is actually increasing its contribution by about 9.9%. Unfortunately, given the magnitude of the federal government cuts, we're unable to absorb all of those changes.
I'm interested in where you stand philosophically on broadening the base of the GST into the future. I'm not asking you this morning if you're about to do this or in discussion about it, but just to get a sense of where the Queensland government philosophically is. Can you see down the track the advantage in doing that, or at least having a discussion about that?
Well, our Premier has made it abundantly clear that the issue is not about increasing the tax further on the GST. It's about making the existing GST work more fairly for Queensland, and that involves things like addressing the mining assessment component of the GST. It's about making sure that loopholes in the GST are closed so it works efficiently.
Yep.
And then we want to explore the opportunities around share of the income tax, which is something that the Premier, Campbell Newman, has floated and raised at COAG and in various other forums. So we want to look at the existing taxes first, make sure that they are being allocated as effectively and as efficiently as we can. That's our primary aim at the moment. Certainly we're not in the list of commentators, if you like, who are suggesting that a GST should be increased. No,
it certainly wasn't anything raised by the Treasurers initially. Tim Nicholls, good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
That's a pleasure.